From my perspective as an Indigenous representative of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact, and I think this issue also affects a lot of Indigenous peoples around the world, is the problem of the continuing violation of the rights of Indigenous peoples, particularly to their lands, territories, and resources. And this also comes along with the non-recognition or violation of our rights to our traditional knowledge, to our sustainable resource management system, to the criminalization of our sustainable livelihoods, and also to the destruction of our biodiversity. And these are all related to the work of FAO, because the violation of these rights are affecting very much our situation of food security. So it is thereby imperative that our right to our lands, territories, and resources should be fully recognized in order to achieve food security and sustainable development for Indigenous peoples around the world. I think FAO is already in the right track because it already has a clear policy on Indigenous peoples, and also it has a voluntary guideline for land tenure governance, and these are very, very positive steps on the part of FAO. I think what's needed now is how to work together in concrete partnership to really implement this guideline, and also especially on the land tenure, so that the contributions also of Indigenous peoples in food security is fully recognized and acknowledged, as well as our contribution to sustainable resource management and with the issue now of climate change. Towards this end, I think FAO can already take bold steps in working with Indigenous peoples to push for the legal recognition of Indigenous peoples' rights to land, territories, and resources at the national level, because it is important that that Indigenous peoples on the ground are the ones to really measure on the impact of the work of FAO to Indigenous people. So the critical area is to really have to contribute in developing an enabling environment for Indigenous peoples at the national and local levels for food security and for protecting the livelihoods of Indigenous peoples in different ways, like direct engagement and partnership with Indigenous peoples, facilitating engagement of Indigenous peoples with governments and other stakeholders, also with donors and other development actors. And that is, I think, the unique position of FAO in partnership with Indigenous peoples. It's good to work together to promote the recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples at the national legislation, so that it will provide the enabling environment for Indigenous peoples to really exercise their sustainable resource management systems, to enhance traditional knowledge and biodiversity, and as this all contribute to strengthening the food security of Indigenous peoples. It's also working directly with Indigenous peoples, especially in improving the nutrition, addressing the nutrition needs of Indigenous peoples, enhancing biodiversity, but also promoting Indigenous products and Indigenous crafts in a way that is sustainable, but at the same time improving the well-being of Indigenous peoples. Promoting good practices in other areas to, facilitating exchange of information and knowledge between and across Indigenous peoples and other development actors, and also within the FAO, not only at the global level, but more importantly, is for the FAO at the national level to really clearly understand the concerns of indigenous peoples and also work with indigenous peoples at the national level. I think now we need to do it again at the local and national level for it to really have a meaningful impact. And I think the first step is to really make sure that FAO and governments at the local and national level fully understand the voluntary guideline and how it is linked to international human rights instruments, as well as to fully understand also the guide on the free, prior, and informed consent. And with that knowledge, it's easier to partner and engage with indigenous peoples on how this can be implemented. And it would be good to identify case areas or cases which we can test the guide on free, prior, and informed consent, and draw the lessons and good practices from that, and also share it to the wider indigenous peoples and within the FAO system, but also with governments. I think it's important that we demonstrate that this the actual implementation of free, prior, and informed consent is the right way to engage with indigenous peoples for their meaningful participation. And if we can showcase good examples on how this is actually done, that does not only benefit indigenous peoples, but even governments and the wider society, it would certainly go a long way. So I think that's one way of moving forward with the voluntary guideline and the free, prior, and informed consent.